Dear Professor, thank you for your presence. Welcome to Tetraedro.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. In the context of the situation we are living today, we decided to carry out a series of online programs with the support of the TV of University of Veracruz to address different aspects of the complex situation we are going through. We are enchanted for your presence to talk about the socioeconomical dimension, Professor.
I'm pleased to be here.
I will introduce you to our audience in Spanish.
Yeah.
Buenas tardes a nuestra audiencia de Tetraedro. Estamos muy contentos el día de hoy con la charla que tenemos a cargo del profesor Gavin Kitching. El profesor Gavin Kitching es profesor emérito de la Universidad de Nueva Gales del Sur, en Sydney, Australia. Autor de una buena cantidad de libros. El más reciente de ellos se titula Capitalismo y democracia en el siglo XXI, editado por Routledge. Y el año pasado apenas fue ocupante de la Cátedra de Excelencia Ludwig Wittgenstein de nuestra universidad. Le damos la bienvenida al doctor Kitching nuevamente. Estamos muy complacidos con su presencia. Professor, you have a relevant and huge body of work about the relation between capitalism, globalization, and democracy. Can you talk about this relationship, please?
Yes. I mean, the central idea in my book is that, and one that I have thought about now for 20 years or more, is that there is an increasing disjunction between the world's economics and its politics. We do have now not a global economy, as I say in the book, but a globalized economy. But we still have overwhelmingly a nation-state focused politics. And that disjunction is one which is having a whole raft of different effects. The book concentrates on its effects on democracy in the West, which I think is being quite destructive, or is being quite destructive, but actually it may well be more destructive of democracy more generally, not just in the Western world, but around the world. Principally because what is happening is the reduction of the power of the nation state to regulate economic relations, including relations that affect the welfare of the people of that state profoundly, a weakening of the capacity of the state to protect citizens from powerful economic forces that have a strong influence on their well-being, their standard of living, their welfare, and so on. So as the state gets weaker, trust in those who control the state also diminishes. There is less and less faith that the state can actually solve people's problems. And of course, that is particularly destructive for democracy, because what is the point of citizens being involved with democratic processes, in elections, in changing governments and so on, if actually those governments, whatever their ideological profile, are less and less able to affect anything. The book says, well, in the long run, the only solution to this must be to bring economics and politics back together again, which means we must have some effective global mechanism for regulating not just the economic stability of the global economy, but also some of its social effects and social inequalities. And because the book is concerned with the long term, it can just simply say, well, that's what we have to do in the long run. The problem, however, is how do we get from where we are now to that long run, particularly because the most, I think, noticeable effect of this disjunction at the moment, oddly enough, is to increase a sense of nationalism, of wanting to perhaps withdraw from the global economy, to see the global economy increasingly as some kind of enemy. And whilst that is understandable, it doesn't, in my view, provide a basis for any long-term solution to this problem. In fact, I think it's likely to exacerbate these problems. So where we are now and where I think we need to be, enormous disjunction, and I have to be honest, I have no very clear idea how we will get from where we are to where we need to go. But I am convinced that this is a major, major problem, a worsening problem, which we will have to address. So that's it. I think broadly, that's the central thesis of this book.
Okay, Professor. In your opinion, what aspects or paradox of this relation between capitalism, globalization, democracy, unbelief or revealed in the context of the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as everybody says, because it's so obviously true, the COVID-19 reveals our common humanity in the most basic biological way. We are all vulnerable to this virus. It has no regard for culture or nationality or anything else. It seems to be discriminatory on the basis of age and some two other factors, but it's certainly not discriminatory on culture or nationality. So our common species being, as Marx would have called it, is revealed by the virus. What is also revealed by it is that although we have a global problem, the response to it is nationally mediated. What is also, quite interesting, I think, is that the principal spreader of this virus appears to be passenger jet aircraft. I mean, the fact that millions of people fly around the world for business and also for tourism and so on seems to have been the main way that this virus has spread. And the effect of that is, oddly enough, that its first impact has been on the more prosperous countries of the world, because more people from prosperous countries fly internationally than do from poor countries. And of course, the enormous global tourism industry, the enormous global transport industry is itself part of the globalization process. It's an integral part of the globalization process. But as I say, when it comes to actually addressing the problem of the virus, dealing with the virus, those responses have been, as you would expect, national ones. And I have no objection to that. I don't think that I cannot envisage a world in which we would have a single public health system. I think it would be highly inefficient if we did. So that's fine. But of course, what it means is that our capacity to deal with the virus depends upon the strength of our public health systems. That itself is a function often of the general prosperity of a country. And it also, paradox upon paradox, the effectiveness of any country in dealing with this virus depends upon it being willing to learn from the experience of other countries who have been impacted first. You do get this virus, because it seems to come in infection waves, serial waves. It gives the later starters the chance to learn from those who have been affected first. And what is again emerging is that countries have been very varied in their capacity to do that, in their capacity to learn and to take effective action on the basis of what others have done before. Perhaps the most paradoxical result of all of the virus to date is that the nominally most prosperous country in the world seems to have been the worst so far in dealing with the virus effectively. That's obviously for political reasons that we all know, but yes, I mean, I suppose in a very brief answer to your question is that the virus has exposed precisely the contradiction, or another dimension of the contradiction between our economics and our politics. It's continuing to do so. One other thing that I was discussing this matter with my son this morning, and he was making the important point that COVID-19, the virus COVID-19, is obviously very infectious, but it's not, not enormously fatal. The fatality rate is very low, and it's particularly low amongst younger people. Even among older people, it's only high where you have severe underlying conditions, obesity and so forth. But of course, it is true that this may only be the first of a number of such viruses. And there is absolutely no reason why subsequent ones could not be not merely infectious, but a good deal more fatal. And if the response of the world to such more dangerous viruses is no better than the response has been to COVID-19, then one could imagine very, very high levels of fatality as well. Because I'm convinced that, well, we know, I mean, this is what we had. We've had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had Ebola, we now have this. I'm sure that this is not going to be the last. And if we imagine about the worst possible scenario, a highly infectious virus that is also has very high morbidity rates, then we will need to be a good deal more efficient in dealing with it than we have been with this. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Professor, a naive perspective is to suppose that the economical and social crisis has been caused by the evil virus.
Yeah.
But obviously this is wrong. Maybe in this case, it can be useful to extend a biological metaphor in order to widen our comprehension of the issue. If we talk about organisms, it clearly that exist a lot of factors, for example, the age, and conditions, for example, obesity, hypertension, that precipitate the biological crisis. Well, in a social way, what was the setup, factors, conditions that precipitate the current economic crisis like COVID-19?
Well, one of the things that I argued in the book was that the conversion of Western economies generally into primarily service economies as a result, as one expression of globalization, as labor-intensive manufacturing moved away from the West and has gone to lower wage areas. The employment gap has been filled in the West by generally service sector employment. Now, the standard economic statistics on that show that service employment is generally, I mean, the service sector is not really a sector, it's highly diverse. But a great deal of the employment in the sector is low wage. A great deal of it, even when it isn't low wage, is insecure because workers don't have long-term contracts or any form of security. Also, as I argued in the book, it's relatively difficult to raise productivity in service industries compared with manufacturing particularly. So that, and the only way really to do that is to reduce wages. That's the main way of increasing productivity, either reducing wages or getting more work out of the same numbers of people. Or, of course, you can also automate service functions as well to a degree. But what I suspected on the basis of the formal statistics and of the data that we had when these economies were working normally is that there was a very large population in Western countries now of people whose fundamental standard of living, even when it wasn't low, was insecure, more insecure than it had been in the past. But what the COVID-19, the virus, has done is to reveal how true that was by, in effect, forcing, because we have no vaccine, forcing states to close down economies, forcing people to stay at home, forcing people to isolate, forcing businesses to close. What was immediately revealed by that, Alejandro, was that so many businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, had little or no savings, no safety net of accumulated capital that could be used to tide them over for a period of time, and that their workers were people living literally from week to week. An income, expenditure, go back to work, more income, expenditure. So that as soon as the economy was closed by government action, people were in quite desperate situations. And therefore we've needed these, well, in the countries that can afford them, these massive amounts of government expenditure to try to maintain a level of consumption that will stop the whole, and to maintain a relationship between enterprises and workers, which will allow perhaps these economies to open up again. The other thing that is revealed is the obvious thing. Who can bear being isolated at home for long periods of time? Well, better educated, white collar, highly skilled, perhaps technical workers or administrative workers, but people who work on the factory floor, work in shops, work in public transport, work in all the sort of medical and non-medical aspects of the health services. These people cannot isolate for long periods of time. They have no money to do so, and of course, in the case of health workers, they are required for the pandemic. And so, as it were, the class divisions, which were always there, have been made palpable, made obvious by the virus. The virus hasn't created them, but it has shown just how extraordinary and exacerbated they have been by the changes in Western economies. I sometimes have said to my family that there are merits to COVID-19. It's not necessarily simply a bad thing. It has shown us what we would prefer to ignore. It has made it impossible to ignore. Now, some people hope that this will lead to major political changes in Western countries and other countries. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I'm not as optimistic as some people are, but it certainly revealed our fundamental problems. And you're quite right, the virus hasn't created them. The virus simply revealed these fractures.
Professor, in your whole work, you have traced a particular point of view about the time, about history, other social science, and his relationship with the concepts of explanation and prediction. Can you talk about these topics?
That's, well, it's perhaps more difficult to do briefly, but as you know, Alejandro, I was trained as an economist. This is my first discipline, and in a very conventional way, which meant that I was taught to use some mathematical models and statistical analyses and so forth, so on and so forth. And I was also taught that economics was a science, and that that societies, human societies, could be studied scientifically in a way modeled, at least very broadly, on natural science, on the way the natural world is studied. And as you know, partly through Wittgenstein, but through other influences as well, I've come to have very considerable doubts about that. I think that the human world is a world of action, reaction, and interaction, and that it is difficult to adequately understand how it works, for example, by using notions of causality drawn from natural science. People act for reasons. Because they act for reasons, it is possible to say that confronted with certain sets of situations, there are only a limited number of things they may do. There are scenarios of how they will act or react in certain situations, but it can be almost impossible to know from that which of the alternatives available to them they will choose, or perhaps which groups of people will choose one response, which another. And so prediction, in the sense of saying, what will happen to the world as a result of COVID-19, or as a result of our creation of a globalized economy. Being able to predict in that sense, I think, is actually, for logical reasons, simply a non-starter. And more mundanely, if you actually look at my own discipline, if you actually look at the track record of economists of being able to predict, or even to predict, not in the sense of any long-term sort of historical notion of what may happen over long periods of time, but even just simply to say, oh, well, what will be the rate of growth next year, or what will be the level of unemployment in 6 months' time. Economists, I mean, there have been many studies that have shown this. Economists almost never get those right. I mean, in the sense that, they say, oh, well, it is unlikely that unemployment will drop below 8% next year. 9 times out of 10, the result is that it's significantly more than 8%, or it's significantly less than 8%. Just the ability to give accurate quantitative parameters to these things, even when you are projecting a normal situation without massive disruptions, even that proves beyond economists again and again and again. What that shows, of course, is that that there are a raft of factors determining what the level of unemployment will be in 6 months' time, and it is almost impossible, even with the best computer models, to adequately model the full range of factors. It's almost impossible. And so now, of course, I mean, what economists usually do is scenarios. Well, if this, and this happens, then we will get that, and that. But if that, and that happens, we will get. So in effect, that's giving up on predictions. It's recognizing implicitly the philosophical problems of actually doing this. But although it's recognized implicitly, it is still the case that the formal ideology of the formal position of conventional economics is still that economics is a science, that it's that if we just work hard enough and we get enough statistics and we make the models better and we have bigger and better computer programs, we will one day be able to. So it is, as it were. So when you talk to conventional economists about this, well, why are your predictions so poor? Why do they not work? The answer is always, well, we haven't got enough data, we haven't got the right computer programs, we haven't got the models that are mathematically sophisticated enough. But that's, for me anyway, that's a way of avoiding what is at bottom a philosophical problem. It's an attempt to, it's a scientistic way of denying a philosophical problem. So that, yeah, that's basically what I was saying.
From this framework,
yes,
what can we say concerning the future of the pandemic in an economic and social way?
The future of the pandemic? Well, as you know, because I expressed this to you in an email, I was very worried and remain worried that because the pandemic was basically carried, as I said, by more prosperous people to the more prosperous parts of the world through the plane and boats and so forth, that its worst effects have not yet been seen. Its worst effects would be in the poorest countries of the world that have much weaker health infrastructure, where social distancing is almost impossible because people are living in huge slums or living very many to a small shack or a small house, and that the pandemic might get much, much worse. We might not even have seen the worst of the pandemic, that it will get worse as it spreads to Africa and India and through the poorer parts of the world. Actually, though, Alejandro, now I'm perhaps a little bit more optimistic about that. And I think the reason I'm more optimistic about that is I think that what is noticeable about those parts of the world is, first of all, they have generally younger populations. They have less old people. Secondly, they do not, on the whole, those people of those countries do not suffer from obesity, high blood pressure, the kinds of illnesses, underlying conditions that are a product of prosperity. They generally do not. They may have underlying health conditions, whether it be from malaria or waterborne disease and so on, but these do not appear to be, at the moment anyway, the kind of underlying conditions that make one specifically more vulnerable to COVID. So it's possible that the situation will not be as bad in poor countries of the world as I had feared. I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that will be the case. But as I've already said, I think the real future issues about COVID are twofold. First of all, we obviously will not be able to return to normality until we have a vaccine. There's also the possibility that the virus may mutate in such a way that producing a vaccine will become more difficult. But even if you imagine the best scenario, which is a vaccine is produced, it is distributed worldwide, and it makes COVID-19 simply another infectious disease which we deal with as the way we deal with flu and so forth. Even if you imagine that optimistic scenario, I am fairly certain, as I've said before, that there will be other viruses, there will be other pandemics. That this is not a one-off situation, and that people, many poor people living in big urban centers obtaining cheap food through these wet markets and so forth is a situation which will probably produce, as I say, more of these problems, and we need to be a lot more efficient and effective in responding to that than we have been to COVID-19, because if we're not, the fatalities could be far worse. So that's it. That is, I think, all I have to say.
Professor, in this optimistic scenario, what can be the function or the role of the social science?
Oh, I see. You mean in dealing with COVID particularly, or just in general terms?
In general terms.
I see. You know, one of the really damaging effects, I think, of seeing the world as being divided, seeing the intellectual universe as being divided simply between scientific truth on the one hand, which is supposedly established scientifically, indubitable, a matter of fact, a matter of expertise on the one hand, and then just opinions on the other, where everybody's opinion is equal to everybody else's. One of the deeply damaging effects of that, I think, has been to to make disappear the fact that there is something between these two things. And in English, we normally express that as the difference between informed and uninformed opinion, right? As it were, you can have an opinion about what is the best way to protect our society from a pandemic, or what is the best way to organize healthcare, or what is the best way to to improve the situation of women in a particular society. You could have an opinion about that, which is an informed or an uninformed opinion. And for me, the role of social science is to turn uninformed opinion into informed opinion, And to do so by saying not these are the scientific facts that you must accept, right? But by saying, look, if you value these things in life, if you value these ways of doing things, if you value whatever it may be, you know, the beauty of your landscape, the freshness of your air, if you value, you know, good education for children, if you value these things, if these are important to you, then here are some suggestions as to what to do to maintain or make better the things that you value, so that you don't, as it were, the point of social science is not to, as it were, impose truths on people, scientifically established truths. The point of social science is to say, is to find out what people value and want, and put before them a range of different ways of doing this, the costs and the benefits of different ways of doing it. And therefore, if you like, to enrich our public culture and our public dialogues, our public conversations. And that's what I think. But there is a kind of paradox, again, a contradiction, Alejandro. I think that, funnily enough, if you de-emphasize the scientific side of social science, will that weaken its sense of legitimacy in the broader community? I don't know. I don't know. But if one can say, look, you know, all opinions are not equal. You know, I'm not simply offering my opinion here. I'm offering evidence, information, analysis to inform opinion, inform my opinion, and through me to inform your opinion. Then I think that's a better way forward, because I think what has been revealed, what is revealed in this health crisis, and what is revealed many times, is that when people feel, as it were, battered by science, their response is to say, oh, it's all just a matter of opinion, and everybody's opinion is equal. And that is a road, I think, to the kind of ignorant populism that we now see abroad in the United States, in Brazil, in Hungary, in many parts of the world. Yeah, that's it, I think.
Professor, do you think that the social dynamics change in this way after COVID-19?
Well, I think one good thing that COVID has done is to show that if you want to deal with a virus, you need to listen to epidemiologists, you need to listen to virologists. It has made it obvious that expertise, that knowledge matters. But if you if you look at what is happening in the politics of so many countries now, there's an attempt to say, well, yes, that health expertise is important, but health experts don't know anything about the economy. Health experts don't know anything about people who have no money because they can't go to work. Health experts don't know anything about businesses that will close if they remain without customers for a few more weeks. And so, you know, there's a kind of, on the one hand, a valuing of expertise, and on the other hand, a sort of devaluing of it as limited. And of course it is. Health expertise is a limited thing. It's concerned with what is the best thing to do to stop fatalities from this virus. But it is right to say, you know, people who can't work, people who can't feed their children, they too are suffering. But what is missing at the moment is, it seems to be simply a debate between those people who want to keep the economies closed for health reasons and those who want to open them up and get back to normal. But normal, what COVID-19 has revealed was that the normal that we're going to get back to was a deeply flawed normal. It was a world in which many people, as I say, live very precarious lives, even in supposedly prosperous countries. And what I feel that social scientists ought to be doing now is saying, well, we don't want to go back to normal. We want to go back to, and we want to go to an improved situation, improved socially, improved environmentally. And we want to rectify the faults in our society that COVID-19 has so clearly revealed. So that's what I think, and that's about offering, again, people informed opinion. And so that's what I would like to see. Whether it will happen, don't know.
Professor, what are the enemies of the informed opinion currently?
The enemies of the informed opinion are two, I think, and they're on completely different sides of the debate. Huh? On the one hand, there are people who have this cult of science, right? Everything is a matter of science. Science produces knowledge. Once we have the knowledge, we simply apply it. And so social science is a form of science, and we know what's the right thing to do for the economy, for society. We've established this scientifically, and this is what you should do, right? And they are met by people on the other side who say, no, we're not. You're just offering opinions, right? You're just offering opinions. My opinion is as good as your opinion. There is science in the world of physics. There is science in the world of chemistry. There is perhaps science in the world of medicine, but there is no social science. That's just all opinion. All opinions are equal, right? So scientism produces a kind of dialectical opposite, which is this sort of populist egalitarianism, you know. So scientism and populism are kind of linked, Alejandro, I think, in a way. I mean, one produces the other, and the only way to I think get around that is to say everybody's opinions must be heard, but not all opinions are equal, you know, because if you offer me an opinion, I'm willing to listen, but I also want to know what evidence, what arguments, you have for that opinion. And I will offer my opinion, and I will show the evidence and arguments that I have for that. Yeah, so that's what I think. I think the enemies of informed opinion are scientism and populism, and but they produce each other. They produce each other.
Professor, we have a lot of dimensions of this problem.
Yes.
We have a biological dimension, we have a social dimension.
Yeah.
So, how can we have an integrative perspective of this issue? In your opinion, how can we have a whole perspective, whole approach?
I'm not sure that I think there is one whole perspective, but what I'll speak rather personally. In my lifetime, I was a child of the post-war period in Britain. And this was a period of quite strong social democratic politics. It came after the war. As often happens in war, there is a sense of a shared enterprise. Many people are killed, many people make sacrifices, etc., etc. In the post-war period, there was a feeling that prosperity, education, healthcare, housing should be more widely shared because people had shared the sacrifices of war, so why should they not share more fairly the benefits of peace, right? So I was a person from a relatively poor family who got very good education through the state, improved my standard of living relative to my parents extraordinarily. I have been able to do things that they would never have dreamed of being able to do, to travel and so forth. But that post-war political situation in Britain, from the 1980s, it was taken apart. It was destroyed, and it was destroyed in the name of neoliberalism, lower taxes, reducing the power of the state, greater room for enterprise and individual initiative, all these kinds of slogans, right? And the net result is that Britain, my country, but also the United States, also I think even countries like, to a degree, France, Germany, Italy, all these countries have become more unequal as a result of the triumph of these kind of ideas. The triumph has been more marked in some places than others, but everywhere there has been this reaction against. And so all these societies have become much, much more unequal. And COVID has shown how weakened they have been by the growth of this inequality. COVID, as I've said, attacks some people more than others. It puts some people a great deal more at risk than others, and those are the people who were already in the disadvantaged position in society. So I have felt that the last part of my life, the adult part of my life, has although it's personally been very fulfilling, politically it has been everything that values that I hold strongly have been attacked, have been undermined to a degree. And I think that's been, on the whole, a disaster socially, but actually even a disaster economically. I'm not convinced that this neoliberal economics, even in its own terms, has been effective, has been efficient. I think it's been very inefficient in certain ways. So I am hoping that before I die, I may see a movement back to the kinds of politics and the kinds of social arrangements that made my life possible, made my improvements in my life and of my children. Because actually, as many people have noticed, the young people now, people of my son's age and their children, they face the possibility of actually having a worse world to live in than I did. And not only socially, economically, but environmentally as well. This is a great sadness for me. So that's all I want to say.
Of course.
Okay.
Professor, we are getting close to the end of this program.
Yes.
So if you could tell us, what are the economic and social lessons we can learn from coronavirus?
Well, I think I've already said, Alejandro, societies that are unequal, that have weakened their states, that have weakened their health care systems, in the name of supposed efficiency and so forth, are vulnerable to this virus, and worryingly, they may be vulnerable to a much more destructive virus. That's the first lesson. And the second lesson is we are a single species. We are people, and we have to find a way of and being globally connected economically has not been a uniformly bad thing. On the contrary, I think it has given an opportunity for poor people in many parts of the world to do better. I think globalization, but we have to regulate it. We have to find a way to regulate it in our species' interests, and above all, in the interests of the environment of this planet. Because this is perhaps one thing I want to finish with. The one thing I think that the West has managed to export to the rest of the world is an image of what it is to live well. For good or ill, and you can argue about that, a certain kind of materialism has now become an almost universal aspiration of the very poorest people in the world. And personally, I think that if you are driving around in a car, live in a nice house, have your children go to good schools, you have no basis upon which to deny that to other people, whoever they are, whether in Africa or wherever. But we cannot do that for everybody with our current technology without destroying the planet. So we have to find a way of doing it in a different, environmentally protective way. That's a big task, but what is this song? We're all in this together. That's all. Okay, that's it.
Professor, thank you very much for your time and your insights.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Right. Okay. No, it was great to talk to you, Alejandro, and to Sylvia and everybody. And I hope you're all well and keep well.
Me permito cerrar el programa para nuestro auditorio de Tetraedro. Ha sido un placer tener al doctor Gavin Kitching con estas reflexiones tan profundas, tan relevantes para todos nosotros. Le agradecemos mucho su participación, así como a la Dirección General de Investigaciones de la Universidad Veracruzana por haber alojado este programa.